key to change. It often happens that cultures are rooted in traditions and rituals that can trample on human rights. In order to change the narratives on menstruation and on human rights in broader terms, it is important to sensitize the population, both men and women, from adults to young people, to make them aware of their rights and stop shaming the menstruators. The period we are living in is highlighting gender inequality and discrimination, and it also emphasizes the urgency of taking concrete action to promote dignified menstruation.
You have to believe in yourself. You have to believe in your ability. You are capable of anything. You can achieve any dream. Please don't limit yourself. Don't live your life limited. It's not all sadness and misery. Life's a challenge, but you will succeed. Take control of how you feel in every circumstance. Work on yourself daily. Your story's far from done. The best is yet to come. To achieve, you must believe. You can live out all your dreams. Persevere, you'll make it through. What you need is all in you. When you believe, you will achieve. You can live out all your dreams. It's about time you knew the truth. You got the power all in you.
यो नेपाली सिरुचाली संसारमा लम्किन्छ झुम्किरी झैँ ज्योति बाली अन्धकारमा चम्किन्छ यो नेपाली सिरुचाली संसारमा लम्किन्छ
चाहे झुकोस् नीलो आकाश, यो नेपाली झुक्दैन।
चाहे झुकोस् नीलो आकाश यो नेपाली झुक्दैन चाहे रुकोस् चिसो बतास यो नेपाली रुक्दैन चाहे रुकोस् चिसो बतास यो नेपाली रुक्दैन झुम्किरी झैँ ज्योति बाली अन्धकारमा चम्किन्छ
Good morning, everyone. Am I audible? Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Thank you, Millie. First of all, let me just say that it's wonderful to be coming. Sorry, just checking my connection. Yes. Good morning, everyone. Good morning again. Wonderful to come in after these two inspiring sessions at the slightly more reasonable time of 6:45 a.m. in Geneva. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to all our listeners and participants and panelists from across the world. And thank you for this opportunity
to really have this chat on this very important session, given where we are in the midst of a global pandemic. First of all, let me check that all my panelists are with me. And I don't see you all, but I'm checking that we have you all on board. Inga, I'm not seeing your video. So I'm just, Inga Winkler.
I'm here.
Oh, great. I can see you now. Wonderful.
Yep. Right,
just
wonderful.
checking that we have you all on. Ram Naresh Yadav.
Yes.
Wonderful. Good morning. And Roshni Tweety, I understand. Thank you, Roshni, for joining us. Can we see you? And I don't see you yet, but that's...
Yeah, I am listening and I think my video is also on.
No problem. When I come to you, it would be great to see you later, your face, for our viewers. And Sneha Ruth from India. Sneha, are you on? I don't hear you, Sneha, but I'll give you time to come back in. I request the organizers to bring you in because we will be kicking off with the keynote speech. So I just wanted to check that everybody is on. And last but not least, joining us from Australia, Sophie Cousins.
Yes, I'm here.
Wonderful. Just want to check your video is working.
It should be on.
Great. Thank you, Sophie. I just like to do a check because once we start, I don't want the flow to be interrupted. So we have a panel of 1 hour and 20 minutes, and I am going to do a little bit of housekeeping before we kick it off. I do encourage, so that we have a really good interactive session, I do encourage all our wonderful participants from all across the world to really write your views and thoughts and questions in the chat box so that we can really bring you into the conversation. These times are challenging times, but they do have advantages. I think we do make much more of an effort to bring in people from all across the world than we do face to face. And I want to make that really happen in this panel. Secondly, I request all our participants to really try and be succinct on the panel so that we can go back and forth with those in the chat as well and enable them to interact with you. Having done that little bit of housekeeping, I just want to kick us off with a reminder of where we are and read to you exactly WHO's numbers as of 7 December 2020, 10 a.m. There have been 66,243,918 confirmed cases of COVID-19, including 1,528,984 deaths. That's where we are in this pandemic today. And a reminder, pandemic comes from the Greek pan, all, and demos, people. Any infectious disease across multiple continents with multiple sufferers of the disease, and of course, millions of deaths. But reminding us that this is not the first time that the world has experienced such a sweeping epidemic. Epidemics of this nature go back several years. I think we've heard from our parents and grandparents of the plague. We ourselves have experienced several epidemics, and for me, the silent epidemics are the more frightening ones coming from the water and sanitation space. Of course, diarrheal disease continues to kill 500,000 children every year, and in the 1980s it killed 5 million. Those are the silent, less talked about, hyped about epidemics. But of course, let's not forget many others, including HIV, which has killed 32 million people to date and infected 75 million. The common flu, of course, which killed more than 50 million people around the world. And of course, the silent killer, and that affects millions of women around the world, the shadow pandemic of violence. 243 million women in the last 12 months suffered from intimate partner violence. With that rather grim scenario, I'm going to really hand over to Inga to give us some hope, Inga. And it's such a pleasure to really, ask you to take this space, to kick us off at this very, really tough time. Inga, you all know, many of you know in this space, as a lecturer at Columbia University and director of the really important conversation on menstrual hygiene and health. But I really want to go back to 2010 when I met Inga, working on in a very, very important space with the inspiring special rapporteur for water and sanitation, Katrina Albuquerque. Inga was her legal advisor that really steered, along with many others, the conversation to bring us from the MDGs to the SDGs in that important space around 6.1 and 6.2, the targets around the right to water and sanitation, putting gender, intersectionality, and human rights center stage. And she's been a colleague, friend, and partner in crime over many years in this important space of menstrual health and rights. Over to you, Inga.
Well, thanks so much for the kind introduction, Archana. Indeed, I mean, it shows that all this, that we go back quite a while, that all this goes back quite a while. And I think it also shows us, I mean, when I do think back of the time 2011, almost 10 years ago, I mean, it shows us that we've come quite a way. So I'm going to try to be positive. Well, but first of all, let me thank Radha and the entire Global South Coalition. I'm so happy to be here. I've been listening in for most of the last two days. So thanks so much for the invitation and the opportunity to join and learn from you. It's been amazing, and I think with the current momentum that we see around menstruation and menstrual health, this conference couldn't be more timely. So if we take the COVID pandemic as a starting point, I think that there are things we can learn from it, and I think in particular what it brought to the fore is the huge disparities along the lines of race, ethnicity, caste, place of residence, class, income, gender, age, disability, and the list goes on. I mean, when we look at the role that essential workers play and the huge disparities between who can stay at home and who cannot stay at home and protect themselves, when we look at racial disparities that are really very evident in the United States, in terms of access to healthcare, in terms of who's affected more and who's affected less, when we look at the gendered impact due to caregiving roles, and so many other roles that fall along the lines of gender, I think that really takes us to looking into the shadow pandemic, as both Radha and Archana put it, of gender-based violence and gender-based oppression, which might be the much more widespread pandemic, but really the one that we don't talk about as much. So what I want to do is share some brief thoughts of framing menstruation as a human rights issue, which I've been doing for years, and which I think helps us understand how to address gender-based oppression in the state, in this area, and which is really central to our understanding of dignity. And I have to say, the last 2 days have been so refreshing. Because I do spend, I mean, Archer, as you know, I do spend a lot of time at the UN. I do spend a lot of time with policymakers. I do spend a lot of time following the media. And it's always about advocating. It's always about trying to convince. It's about repeating the same points over and over again. And I feel like while we do see the human rights discourse, human rights framing being taken up in the UN context, in policy making in many countries, it's a very instrumentalized, tokenistic, reductionist, even sanitized discourse around human rights. I mean, Prabha, when you were talking this morning and you mentioned the Security Council, I mean, as far as I'm aware, there are 2 mentions in Security Council resolutions that address something around menstruation, and those are very, very quick mentions around menstrual products and nothing else. And I think that's the general sentiment. We do see menstrual products being pushed. We do see a lot of talk around menstrual hygiene. We see some menstrual education, but really not that much. And when we do see menstrual education initiative, I mean, it's very much what Jane called earlier today, the pads and the plumbing, and how to use it. So all in all, I think it's this very narrow understanding, this very sanitized understanding of what human rights are actually about. And listening to you over the last 2 days really shows that there is a much broader understanding of human rights that really helps us to look beyond just menstrual product and menstrual hygiene and the wash sector, but actually gets us to all the human rights that we should be concerned about, and that asks us to look at the human rights to health, to housing, to education, to work and to safe and healthy working conditions, to freedom of religion and belief, cultural rights, the freedom to take part in public life, and of course equality and non-discrimination, and so many more. And I think that is what we need to push. And usually what I do here is talk a lot about menstrual stigma, and talk a lot about the impacts of menstrual stigma that pretty much affect all of us in every sphere of life, all across the world, that affect how we are perceived and how we perceive ourselves, that affect how we seek healthcare or hesitate to seek healthcare, that also affects how the medical training that many healthcare providers have is extremely insufficient related to menstrual health conditions, and that affects our perception in the workplace and in public life, where menstruators are too often seen as hysterical or not trustworthy, unfit for decision making. You all know the labels. But I don't think I have to dwell that much more on that, because we all very much seem in agreement that we really, I mean, what we really need to do is tackle menstrual stigma, and that we need to combat myths and misinformation with non-judgmental and accurate and accessible information about all aspects of menstruation. And that we also need to look into how menstrual stigma and menstrual discrimination intersects with other forms of discrimination and marginalization. And I think at the core of it, that is what human rights are actually about. And I think at the moment, our understanding of how different menstruators experience menstruation is quite limited. And we certainly do not know enough about the menstrual health of marginalized populations. So what we often see is that menstruation is framed as a women's or adolescent girls' issue, But then does that mean that we ignore other women's health issues across the lifespan? And do we acknowledge women who do not menstruate for whatever reason? Do we understand the psychosocial significance of menstrual cycles, but also their loss, and how that differs based on race, class, culture, religion, and other factors? And conversely, do we address the needs and experience of menstruators who identify as trans, non-binary, or gender non-conforming? And in particular, with the heavy focus that we see on girls in schools, and I don't want to say that girls aren't important, they most certainly are, but by focusing exclusively, almost exclusively on schools, does that mean that we further entrench the marginalization of girls who are out of school, which often then overlaps with disabilities, which overlaps with people who are on the move, which overlaps with people who experience homelessness. So I think we need to make a much greater effort to look into these intersecting forms of stigma and discrimination. In addition to that, human rights are about participation, and participation in a very broad sense, which is about enabling menstruating individuals to deal with menstruation the way they want to, not to be negatively impacted and face constraints in their daily lives. And that most certainly doesn't only mean to decide on which products to use, but also means to take decisions on what to do or not to do during menstruation, which social and cultural activities to engage in or not, and to take informed decisions about one's body. So participation in human rights terms is really about autonomy, including bodily autonomy, about voice and agency, and as such it's really closely related to dignity and self-worth. And the last aspect I want to highlight is about accountability. Because human rights really provide a framework that focuses on what states need to do, so that we don't let states off the hook and basically consider menstrual health a matter of charity that is completely left to civil society. And what I so often hear is that menstrual health is something deeply personal, that it depends on individual behavior, individual habits and actions. And that's certainly true, but that doesn't mean that menstrual health is any less of a human right. So states have a range of obligations to make this right a reality, which is primarily about creating an enabling environment, promoting menstrual literacy, promoting workplaces that are period-friendly, tackling gender stereotypes. And it's often these most indirect and least visible obligations that we've been talking about so much already that are the most important ones in realizing human rights, and that also don't necessarily cost a lot of money. So what human rights require is really a shift towards comprehensively addressing menstrual health and menstrual stigma, a shift towards prioritizing those who are usually left behind, and creating the conditions in which menstruators can make informed choices on any aspects related to their menstruation, free of judgment and constraint. So I'm very much looking forward to discussing this further, to hear your thoughts from many different perspectives. And again, thanks so much for having me and inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be part of this. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Inga, and that really, really underlines what I hope will underpin this entire session. The human rights framework, the fact that these rights are really intersecting, inalienable, indivisible, and to remind us of how we opened the conference by really talking about human dignity, and that just being human confers on all of us really the concept of dignity as integral to our person that nobody can take away from us. So thanks for underlining those really, really basic freedoms that every human being, whatever gender or whatever other variable might be at play, has a right to, and that nobody can take away from us. I want to bring us really back to this pandemic and having, I mentioned so many, and it's really interesting To me, as I go, don't dare step out of the house here where we are under lockdown again in the second wave, to remember having come and lived most of my time in Asia, that 1 million people were killed in each Asian flu, whether it was SARS, whether it was the Hong Kong flu, 1 million people were killed each time. But this has brought us to our knees this time, this pandemic. And I want to move to Roshni first. Roshni, can we see you? Please? It's really nice.
I'm just hearing.
Wonderful. Roshni, you come from a very interesting and important space, that of representing the front line of this pandemic. Without our health workers, without our nurses, we would all be not just on our knees, but flat on the ground. And Roshni is the Chief Nursing Administrator, Ministry of Health and Population, and responsible also for midwifery education in the government of Nepal. And Roshni, as we look at this pandemic, I just want to ask you where you feel menstrual dignity fits in this space, particularly from this perspective of the health workers and your ministry. Over to you, Roshni.
Thank you, Archana. Thanks for the questions. Actually, being a female, we have to bear menstruation. It's a normal phenomena for everyone. But it's a little bit difficult during the disaster and the pandemic period, because we need to in this battlefield in every aspect. Basically, in this pandemic, as the nurses are in the full set of personal protective equipment, it's quite a bit difficult while they are menstruating, because they need to change their sanitary pad, they need to clean up themselves, need to take adequate fluid, even in the rest. But while taking care of the patient in pandemic with the full set of PPE is a little bit difficult. And sometimes for those who are the heavy bleeder, it's more difficult, because during the bleeding, they need to take adequate fluids. And they need to have a rest. And also they need to ventilate their feelings too. But these all conditions are lacking in the pandemic, mainly for this such kind of the COVID infected. But if it is in the disaster, they can have a shift changes, take rest, or take adequate fluids, and then go to the washroom just to clean, wrap up, and some other things. So most of our nurses, those who are while in the menstruating, they use double or triple sanitary pads while wearing the PPE, and also using the menstrual cup, so that it will be better not to change the sanitary pad during the 6 hours or 8 hours of duty. But in Nepal, what we manage is here that for the total 8 hours, 2 groups are managed, so that the one nurses will work for the 4 hours and then change the PPI and then take rested and involved in the recorded reporting. So among the total nurses, we divided into 2 groups. One group for the recording reporting and another group for direct patient care. So mostly they engage within the PPA for complete 4 hours. So that's how we are managing in the government hospital as well as in the private hospitals too.
Thank you so much, Roshni. This is so inspiring because, in the press, we've heard horror stories, first from China and then from many other countries as nurses and midwives. And let's not forget that 70% of the frontline health force is constituted by women. And I mean, we don't have figures for it, but I would imagine more than 80% of those are menstruating. And at some time, we've been in the throes of this pandemic since March, and that the PPE was not designed for women. But I want to remind us all of what Rajan Pandey ji said in the last session, so that we really knit these pieces together. Even in non-crisis epidemic times, we do not have basic facilities. The environment is not built to really guarantee basic human dignity. The environment in the best of times is not really designed to enable basic biological needs of men and women and gender diverse human beings from all over the planet. So, I mean, COVID has just brought us to our knees, reminding us that we've built something which is not designed for us. But it's very inspiring, Roshni, to hear about really the management and the acknowledgement of psychosocial stress, but also really the shifts and how they have been designed. It can be done. And moving to Ram Naresh ji. Ram Naresh Yadav.
Yes.
I would really like to move to you with Ram Naresh Yadav is a manager of public health in Good Neighbors International. And Good Neighbors International does amazing work with children, including nutrition and overall care. And I'm sure you'll talk to us a little bit about that. But since COVID has really mobilized in terms of relief measures. So really moving over to you and your experience in COVID, where does menstrual dignity fit for you and your work, really again at the front line through this pandemic? Ram Naresh Yadav.
Yeah, well, thank you. As the experience regarding the dignified menstruation in the field, so I would like to highlight as GNI is an international organization working for 35 countries all over the world. So there is GNI has been working for Africa, Asia Pacific, North America and the Latin America and the Caribbean. GNI organized awareness raising campaign with the call of periods do not stop for the pandemic through quiz and the online questions answer targeting school going adolescent and supported to supply MHM kit and dignity kit at quarantine. So, and moving forward, as per my own perception on COVID, effect of MHM is that MHM is still not being focused sufficiently as a critical agenda for disaster response. Mainstreaming of the MHM shall keep going on so that more community or the government-wise stakeholders can naturally accept or perceive MHM activity as significant part of support for their community. I feel like MHM issue is still deemed as a small subset of the wash sector with gender issue not being highlighted. And on the other hand, the pandemic provided the good chance for the MHM activist community to effectively advocate MHM issue. With the call of the period do not stop for pandemic, I suppose there were a number of sessions held that highlights the importance of the MHM during the pandemic. It was not only informative, but I believe it has invited the interest of the policymakers, which engage the chance of MHM issue get the needful attention. So, as I earlier mentioned, like the GNI has been working for the 35 countries. So on the basis of that, for the Nepal, GNI has been working for MHMS a special project in Bajura. There is the some district like Bardia, Darchula, Kathmandu, and Kailali as well. So we are working for there in Nepal for the 20 districts and focusing targeting the COVID-19. We have raised the awareness for the all targeting the school-going adolescents and to the mobilization of the FCHB to raise the awareness among the health mother groups. They are well known about the COVID-19, their effect and how the COVID-19 will affect for the pregnant woman and lactating woman like that. So that's how the GNI has been working for the to address the dignified menstruation at the ground level, mainly focus on the MHM kit and the dignity
Thank
kit.
you. Thank you so
Yes.
much, Ram Naresh Yadav, and for reminding us that, periods don't stop for pandemics, but also there's a real danger with the attention shifting to COVID-19, really of the awareness really reducing and the silence resurging, raising its head again around menstruation. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to move now to Sneha Ruth. Sneha, can we see you now? Are you online?
Hi.
Hi, wonderful. Now, Sneha just comes from a fascinating kind of area of work that I know almost nothing about. So I'm really looking forward to learning from you. She's a palliative physician and somatic psychologist and the founder of Lankini. You're going to tell us how to pronounce it. It's a Hindi word that I have never heard. And you're also going to tell us what it stands for. As I pass over to you to tell us more about what it means, but has your narrative around menstruation been adjusted slightly through this pandemic? Over to you, Sneha.
Right. Thank you for inviting me into this conversation and among such esteemed speakers. My name is Dr. Sneha Ru. I'm a palliative physician and I'm the founder of Ori Kalankini. It's a Hindi word, and Kalankini is a word generally used to degrade a person. It's almost as if when I call somebody a Kalankini, I call somebody. I tell them that they've stained my reputation. So literally it means she who stains, and we wanted to reclaim the word, and that's why we come from a place like, yes, I stain literally. I also stain all the apparent rules and boundaries set upon me, and now let's talk. So we come from that space. We as an organization started in 2013, and we're looking at changing the narratives around menstruation and sexuality in India using art, theater, and dialogue. The three main values that we stand for, and it has changed, is first one is the ethno-cultural perspective around menstruation. So we through our workshops aim to give a perspective about the place of the menstruator in the society through time and through space. Instead of me telling you touch the pickle or you don't touch the pickle, I have a series of pictures, videos, games where they get to learn about how was a menstruator treated in a Neolithic time, in the pre-colonial time and post-colonial time. And also through geography, through space. So what are the menstrual rituals in Karnataka, south of India, in Bengal, east of India, in America, Native American tribes, in African tribes. We're talking about red tent. So we're giving a whole timeline where the position of menstruator has been described. Two main things happen because of this, and that's why it's become a strong value that we stand by. One thing happens is that they start understanding that culture keeps changing and culture is made by people. So we are trying mainly to make a space for them to think critically about what culture is, because conversations around religion cannot be put aside. We say, okay, we don't want to get too political, we don't want to stir feathers, but it is religion which converts into culture and affects our daily life. So the first value is, that's why very, very important to us for them to start questioning and thinking. Then automatically they'll, to touch the pickle or not, to go to the temple or not, they are deciding, once we give them the perspective through time and space. Second value which we hold dear is earth-centric and body-centric practices and policies. This happened because I started experiencing, also because I'm a somatic psychologist, I started experiencing, what would you say, like awareness of my body once I started working on the land. Like when I started waking up and resting with the sun, when I started working on the ground, like, I was in a reforestation project, I was sitting in women's circles every week. So I noticed that, getting in touch with my cycle means more
Sorry,
than...
just a moment. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Can I request everyone on this call, apart from Sneha, to please mute their mics? We're getting a lot of disturbance. Please mute your mics, everyone but Sneha. Thank you.
Thank you, Archana. Yeah, so I understood that dignity, when we talk about dignified menstruation, it means to have an embodied experience of it, to not fight it. Of course, products are important. Of course, policy is important. But unless I know what it means to me, unless I make a personalized relationship with my cycle, then I'm not going to treat it with dignity. Forget others. So body-centric practices, earth-honoring practices is the second focus which we have. We don't talk about or propagate or distribute the disposable pads. We call it plastic pads. We don't even call it normal pads. When the girls call it normal pad, I say no, call it plastic pad. And there are certain situations where they're useful, say humanitarian crisis or people with disabilities and mental challenges that they cannot do it. But I think
I'm so
otherwise...
sorry. I'm so sorry. May I request Sadiksha Tamang to please mute, and anyone else? Sadiksha Tamang, please mute your mic. I'm so sorry, Sneha.
So earth honoring and body honoring practices. Our adolescent learn how to chart the cycle, the 4 archetypes of menstruator within that one cycle. And the third value is inclusion. This was added later. Earlier it came from a place of sitting in women's circle, women exclusive spaces. Then when I discovered myself as a bisexual person, I started meeting trans people, non-binary people. I had one non-binary person come talk to me and tell that, okay, I really love your content, but then it's so woman girls that, I cannot. And then it's just started understanding, I guess, that not all people who menstruate are women. And we are really pushing a whole bunch of people already who are marginalized. So inclusion now is among the top priority in our organization. We started a parallel channel called Bloody Inclusive, where trans experiences of menstruation are put on a podcast. So this is the overview of our organization. Now coming to your question, this was just to give a background of what work is.
Okay, I'm going to actually have to come back to you, but if you had just a sentence on your narrative through this pandemic, and then I'll come back to you after moving to Sophie.
During the pandemic, we focused more on enabling communities to make washable cloth pads. We started a campaign called Pads That Last. We thought this is the best time to pitch in again that disposable products are not long lasting. You might distribute the product this month. Who's going to do it next month? So I think we pitched in, we used this time to reiterate that fact that it's not sustainable in any way, monetarily, environmentally. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sneha. I'm sure if Jaideep's still listening, he's really happy. But Ori Kalankini, amazing. Yes, I stain. I love that. It's, I think, really cool. And thank you for reminding us, about the somatic, the psychosomatic, because I think the key outpouring, a silent outpouring of grief around mental health that really has no takers right now is going to have huge social and economic costs going forward. And I think that reminder is really, really important for us to keep at the back of our minds. Sophie, over to you. Sophie, joining us from Australia, is an award-winning author who's reported from over 20 countries, and is the recipient of several awards on sexual health, migration, etc. Before I continue, Sophie, can we see you?
Yes, my video is on.
There you are. There you are. I think it waits for you to speak, so I have to make sure of that first. Importantly, she has spent the last few months of COVID working on the pandemic in Australia, and is the author of Renewal, 5 Paths to a Fairer Australia, which focuses on something very dear to my heart to these, through these tough times, building back better. So over to you, Sophie, for your really your take on the media's kind of narrative through this pandemic around menstrual dignity. Over to you.
Sure. Thank you for the kind introduction, and hello from a very, very chilly London. I just left Nepal and I'm on my way to Afghanistan, back to Afghanistan. So, I mean, I must admit, for the last 7 months, I spent a significant amount of time in Australia, where I haven't spent any time in the last 10 years really, working on a book on building back better. So I feel like I'm now just slowly getting back into my day job, which is reporting on health in South Asia. But I guess a couple of things is that I think media coverage on this topic has increased a lot in recent years. And I think that's perhaps been driven by the fact that people are starting to wake up to the very fact that this is a human rights issue, and that we need to do better in the media about telling stories that kind of go beyond the surface level. So I think there definitely has been a shift in media coverage surrounding menstruation, and there's been a big push on the issue of ending period poverty. But I must say, I think that perhaps sadly has gained momentum in the mainstream media because this is an issue that impacts everyone. Similar to COVID, you know, the way that we've seen a vaccine come to fruition in such a short, incredible period of time, that's because the pandemic has affected almost every single person on the planet. So in South Asia, I still think that there's been a lot more discussion around stigma and taboo. And in Nepal, where I live, you know, a lot of articles focusing on chapati, for example, but that's not the only story to tell. And, you know, I've been guilty of it myself. I've told stories on chapati. I've spoken to Radha many, many times on this issue. But I think we can do better. We have to do better and get past, particularly in the Western media, we don't need to tell these stories of the other and these, you know, the cultural aspects of menstruation. We need to go beyond that. But I must say that the pandemic, in terms of the media, it's been quite difficult to get stories published that aren't specifically focused on COVID, that aren't about the vaccine, that aren't about, you know, all the issues surrounding that. And one issue that has gained a lot of coverage is the skyrocketing rates of gender-based violence. But in terms of menstruation coverage, there's been very, very, very little. Yeah.
Thanks so much. And it kind of reminds us, you know, about not just the media's interest in what is sensational, you know, mortality rather than morbidity, right? Mm-hmm. Child death, way more interesting than the silent suffering of aging people.
Exactly.
Postmenopausal women, not interesting anymore, you know, that's not about lifeblood anymore. In fact, menstruation is definitely sexier than menopause. You know, you've lived out your life, you're a useless vessel now, you know, it doesn't really matter. So I think I'm going to come back to Inga, really, to ask you, Inga, you know, we are in the midst of a pandemic, but it is, to me, completely shocking now, working 2.5 decades on gender equality, to find that we are able to forget every day that 1 in 3 women experience violence, you know, every day of their lives. And how is it that the world is able to mobilize great cooperation, fantastic, collaboration across borders and countries? Well, most, I won't name some that won't join the movement, but for COVAX, for, joint response to this pandemic. But really, we allow this silent, really reprehensible, absolutely horrible, shadow pandemic to continue across centuries. Over to you, Inga. Where are the human rights and all this? Where are all these agreements, conventions, duty bearers, silent through all this? Inga?
Great question. I mean, I couldn't have put it any better. But I really wish I had the answers. And yeah, I think those are the answers that we are all looking for. And I mean, that we've all been looking for many years, decades. And I think a lot of it, a lot of the gaps that we are seeing has to do with what so many of you already pointed out, that we are in that savior mentality, which permeates so much of what we do in human rights, that we definitely like to point to the other, the far away, the stories that get repeated over and over again. I mean, when you look into the media, also when you look into UN documents or human rights discourse more broadly, I mean, Chowpatty gets such outsized attention compared to other forms of violence and oppression and gender-based discrimination. So I think it has a lot to do with that. And I think the other factor might be that we all like things tangible. We all like to be able to pinpoint something, and I think that is why period poverty gets a lot of traction. I mean, the alliteration in it is something that really that's really too easy to pick up. And it has a concrete solution. I mean, any charity can give products to people and give out menstrual products. But that is obviously not what human rights are about. Yeah, so I think it has a lot to do with what is being sensationalized, and then what we see as the solutions, the very technical quick fixes that we all like to suggest. And I think in that sense, the whole human rights enterprise has been overtaken by development discourse, and I mean to a large extent has become part of the problem. And I mean that is then reinforced through the media, reinforced to what is actually taken up at the UN. So I mean that might be a partial explanation, but I do realize it's not a solution. So yeah, I think we all need to work together to get to those.
Thank you so much. Yes, all these policies, conventions, I'm in that space as well at UNAIDS, it's just, it's so hard to believe that less than 50% of women in the world make their own decisions around sex even today, when to have or when not to have sexual relations. It's only half of women engaged in sexual relations today that make their decisions or are allowed to make their decisions because of lack of agency and bodily autonomy. Even today, while we're talking about going to the moon. So yeah, we are really far away from translating those wonderful rights and the Universal Declaration around personal freedoms and dignity and human rights into reality. But I think this is even more of an issue when you dare not to conform to social norms. And I want to come back to Sneha to really also pick up from a couple of chats which remind us that we must really look at a more inclusive way to define dignified menstruating, menstruators and non-menstruators, while not taking away from the feminist struggle. I really want to underline that. It's really important to embrace plurality in feminism and to really interpret the struggles of diversity right through, but not taking away from any one particular group. And Kamla Bhasin on day one, through a keynote, reminded us that menstruation is still lifeblood and that none of us would be here without that. And I want to come back to you, Sneha, to really ask you about, how your movement and your campaign and your narrative has addressed COVID and the needs of dignified menstruation through that. Over to you.
Thank you. Before that, I just wanted to add a few sentences on feminist movement and the idea that when we are more inclusive, we are taking away from women and girls. That is a usual, I don't know why it should still be a dichotomy, but feminism itself stands against all forms of oppression. And patriarchy is what if patriarchy is what we are focusing to fight, then heteronormativity is like the pawn of patriarchy. When you make very strong gender roles like a man and a woman,
Absolutely.
and consider only heterosexual relationships to be valid, you're actually perpetuating patriarchy. So I think queer movement and feminist movement have long since have a history of walking together, and it's the only way we can actually do it. Coming to your question, as an organization, like I previously started, this pandemic has helped us just get started on things which we were taking 2-3 years to start. One, for example, was to start our online training. Second, fundraising. Like we raised 2.5 lakhs rupees of fund while we were doing the Pad for Pad campaign. Absolutely, I never thought that during the pandemic people will be able to donate, but within 2 months we were able to do it because the struggle was real. And also this what I mentioned earlier, that pitching in the idea again that washable cloth pads can be a very strong asset now. And also when the livelihood opportunities were coming down, our organization held a lot of training, like washable cloth pad making training, and we also developed an app, a common platform where the relief distributors, the people who are manufacturing cloth pads, and people who would wish to donate, they could find each other. So technology, finance, and just appearing online, all these three things happened because of the pandemic. It was because of the calls we started getting. We hold trainings to make cloth pads, we hold art-centered workshops, and also community advocate training. So wherever I had worked earlier on ground, I started, because girls were getting the pads from the schools. And now that the schools were shut, so everyone wanted, okay, is somebody distributing the pad? Then the ration kits were going, but pads were not there. So my network started asking me for it, and that's when we started. Because otherwise, I was not so actively involved in generating revenue during the pandemic. But then I thought that is the step we just happened to take. The situation forced us this way.
That's fantastic, responding to real struggles and real needs. And you remind us how sometimes it's a crisis that pushes us in a certain direction. And I think that's really amazing, because if we are so fixed in our little boxes and silos that we can't evolve, and absolutely to underline your point, and Kamla Bhasin made the same point the first day, that the feminist struggle is about plurality and embracing diversity. And I wanted to start with that because there are feminists and there are feminists. And, we can all label ourselves feminists, but we do not all agree on necessarily on something. And I wanted to put that center stage to really underline the importance of respecting difference and diversity as we go through this conversation, but also really bringing men along. And that we really underline that on the first day. And I want to go across to Ram Naresh Yadav to ask you, in your work with Good Neighbors International across 35 countries, and currently in the pandemic, are there some one or two positive examples of really response on menstrual dignity during this pandemic? Over to you, Ram.
During the pandemic situation, Good Neighbors International has been working for health post, community, quarantine, and the mainly while we are talking about the menstruation, for this, we are mainly focused for the MHM kit and the dignity kit. For the, we are focusing for the school going adolescents, and then at the community level, we are mobilizing the FCSB, Female Community Health Volunteers.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I really am interested in, given that during lockdowns, many schools were shut, etc. Did you change your strategies in any way? It's wonderful work. You've explained the dignity kits, etc., the MHM kits. But what happened when girls were not going to school? What is the kind of, did you do different awareness campaigns? Is there anything you changed during COVID?
Yeah, during COVID, actually, we have been starting some online awareness raising, as I earlier mentioned. For that, there is the school-going children. They work together at their own home, and there is some questions. We are using like the online system via mobile, and then there is some radio and FMs. We are responding, and then there is some quiz, and there is some pictorial diagrams things, and they while we are talking about the change at the community level and the school going girls, they are talking about, they're in the group, they are talking about how the menstruation will be dignified at the community level during the COVID-19, and they after the taking awareness, the children orient their parents, their neighbors, and the girls who are not going, or the women who are not going in schools. So that's how there is the change became at the community level through the school going adolescents.
Thank you so much. And it's what Sneha reminds us about, that sometimes these epidemics, crises, push us into spaces that we're not comfortable in. Others on the panel of my generation, I'm sure, also prefer face-to-face interaction. I used to always say, oh my God, I hate all this online stuff. Well, I've had to embrace it, learn about it, and welcome the positive aspects of it, learning across many geographies without a carbon footprint. So wonderful to hear about your strategies for reaching, for continuing the awareness through these difficult times. Thank you, Ram Naresh. I'm going to come back to Sophie. Sophie, you've covered more than 20 countries, and we've had Ebola, we've had SARS, we've had so many different challenges across the years. And there were wonderful examples even through Ebola of creativity, community engagement, community leadership, really that prevented supply disruptions, that enabled critical services I work in the sexual reproductive health space, and the only thing that has kept ART supplies going, as well as multi-month dispensing, so that people don't have to move out too often to clinics, etc., is communities. Do you have some positive examples for us or challenges from earlier health crises and epidemics or natural disasters through your reporting? Over to you, Sophie.
Oh, that's a tough one. I covered the aftermath of the Nepal 2015 earthquake, and now with COVID, and there are many overlaps, and it goes back to what you just said about community and putting communities at the heart of stories. And I think, at least in my own work, kind of looking from 2015 to now, is a push to say, okay, well, I'm going into this community, whether that's in Gorkha in Nepal or whether that's an Aboriginal community in Australia, to report on the pandemic, and saying, okay, how do you want your story to be told? Rather than me going in with a pre-reported narrative, which is unfortunately very often the case, that journalists parachute into a place, they already know this, they believe they know the story in their head, so they've already got the questions written down, and they go into a place. So people fly into Nepal, they've never been to Nepal, they don't understand the context. And so they ask questions that are very narrow and very limited. And so they get the story that they think they should get. But what happens if we kind of change that and we actually just sit with people and we say, okay, I'm here because I'm interested on X topic. Let's have a conversation. How would you like your story to be told? What do you think's missing from the narrative? How can we do better? So, for example, which is unrelated to menstruation, but very much on this issue, that when I went into an Aboriginal community in Australia, I spent a good week trying to speak with people, and people said, no, go away. We're sick of the media. The media has come into this community. They've painted us as rapists, murderers, people who just sit around, drunks, drug addicts. And then you go there and you realize, well, actually, that's really not the case. And over a week of, having these conversations, but, it's about building trust in a community, because when these communities have been consistently put down or told by the journalists, oh, absolutely, I will not paint you as a drug addict or an alcoholic. And then that's what the journalist does. They take the story and they leave, and they get what they believe is the story, or, the juicy content. But so I think, that for me is been, I guess, a journey that I'm going on, and conversations that I have regularly with friends who work in the industry about how to be better, how to not tell these absolute cliche stories, which I guess goes back, back to the issue at hand is, like we were saying with Chowpatty, it's gotten so much coverage. It's at the front page of the New York Times and the Washington Post. But, because it grabs headlines and people in America, what? Nepal puts girls in huts when they're on their period. Okay, that sounds...
And well, for many years, I personally have fought to redefine in my own work reporting, especially to donors, because there's been a little bit of wonderful work around talking about failures, things that don't work, but not enough. And also what isn't a huge tsunami but to that individual is a very important story. You know?
Absolutely. And I think someone else mentioned it, I think it was Inga, you know, talking about the decolonizing, you know, development. And, you know, the media perpetuate this because the media basically regurgitate what development partners and agencies put out, and they just they perpetuate this, and we need to break from it. We have to become better. And in the media, you know, that starts with, I mean, we need systemic change, but on an individual level, because you go, well, okay, we need to change the system. How do we do that? Well, we can do it one story at a time, because every journalist can make a change because they can choose to tell better, different stories. And we have to hold ourselves accountable to that.
Thanks so much, Sophie. So really, let's change some of the way we look at evidence, stories, data, because actually, particularly for dignified menstruation, and I think I really want to shout out to the Radha Paudel Foundation and the conversation over these last 1.5 days, because I really think we do not get to see or hear or listen to or engage in these kind of organic conversations enough. The conversation around menstruation is now shifting very much to like sector experts, you know, SRHR, WASH, evidence, data, reporting. Hey, let's bring it back to menstruators. I mean, I shouldn't even be here. I'm just claiming my space because I did menstruate, and because menopause is a part of the conversation. But, you know, let's really let young people and people at different stages with different milestones across the menstrual space redefine how we tell the story. Thanks so much for that. Coming back to you, Roshni, I was so inspired by your positive example of what Nepal is doing. I mean, really, really practical, creative. Can you tell us a little bit about how these practical steps may help us to really institutionalize in a more systematic way after COVID, in a way that really puts dignity at the center for menstruators in the health worker space? Can you tell us any ideas you might have for making this part of the health system? Over to you, Roshni.
Okay, yes. Actually, the menstruation must be central for in every aspect. Just I want to join with the last sentence of the narrator. For this COVID pandemic, Nepal government, Ministry of Health and Population developed the standard of the isolation center. And within that standard, menstruation and the management of the menstruation is kept in the highlighted points. So what are the areas that we need to maintain if the isolated persons are menstruated in the isolation center? It includes not only the hygiene kit and dignity kit. It includes the availability of adequate waters in the restroom.
We lost you for a moment, Roshni. We just lost you.
Oh, sorry. Am I audible now?
We cannot hear you now.
Sorry. Now, there is no mute. Am I audible now? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
So this already included into the isolation center. That is also the one of the inclusion in the health system. And also next one, I want to mention here that in Nepal, all the health facilities have the minimum service standard. So within that minimum service standard, the enabling environment for the menstrual hygiene is included, from health posts to hospitals. And right now, many health infrastructure is constructing, so this is also included. Now come to the points, that 3 practical steps that institute the dignified menstruation during the pandemic. One thing is menstruation is not only the issue of menstruator. It must be the issue from childhood to the menopause. because we need to develop the clear concept from the childhood. If we develop that the menstruation is a normal phenomena and it's responsibility of the menstruator as well as non-menstruator, then we can develop the very practical steps in the future. It seems that it's a principle, but it's the most practical one. And then second one is, as nurses and midwives, more than 90% are female, and they spread their positive vibes to other people by becoming the self-role model and others. So next practical steps may be that those the different taboos related to menstruations, first they need to become role model for themselves and then for their family. Then it will be for the community. Everybody know it's a normal, so better to stop the different type of taboos related to menstruation by first self. Such as myself, I'm not ruling anything, but myself in my mind that, okay, there is something is wrong, because while I was the child, my parents and other person teach me that, okay, menstruation is the wrong things you need to do, you do not need to do, those and donors are many things. But if the persons become changed by self and she will become role model for other, then it will be very easy. So for that, the surrounding and non-menstruator must be supported. And the third one, practical points, that's I'm very much impressed with the advertise of the YY Chow Chow, because this menstruation is not only the health matter. It is a matter of the social and
you're impressed with, I missed that.
Sorry?
You are very impressed with?
Yeah, impressed with the advertisement of the YY Chow Chow, because it's a different modality to deliver the message rather than just to give. Because we need to deliver the message how the people accepted in that. So use of the media through the versatile methods is also the most important. So menstruation is a health problem, yes, but it must be beyond health, especially linked with the socio-cultural aspects. Now just I focus is menstrual pad is a must, but it's not the mean. It's the one thing. Main thing is their socio-cultural habit, and the grown-up from the childhood must address that it's a normal phenomena. Even the male child must understand why it occurs and what are the different activities they need to do, rather than do's and don'ts. Explain why it's do and why it's done. And just do not put in mind that, okay, menstruation is the sign, do not go, because it's not only, we clearly mentions about the why nurse. So that I have 2 kids, boys, I explain them it's a normal because of this. So in this way, practically we can have a dignified menstruations.
Thank
now,
you.
Most of the time people just focus on the sanitary pad only, but it's not. That's the main point I want to focus. And in Nepal, most of the health institutions now is becoming the dignified menstrual friendly, but still continue monitoring is must.
Thank you so much, Roshni, for reminding us of the really practical but holistic cross-sectoral implications of bringing dignity to the menstrual movement, whether it's public spaces, whether it is awareness and curricula, whether it is the media. No one sector can walk alone and hope to achieve it. So thank you, but also most importantly, thank you for pointing out that this is already being done in Nepal. I think the challenge is really to sustain it post-COVID. Somehow, when there's a crisis, we all become very creative, and when the crisis disappears, we forget what happened during the crisis. So really hoping that this platform can help us to think ahead about sustainability. And that brings me really to share something a bit unfortunate. I definitely lost connection for a few moments, and I lost the earlier chat. Is that true for all of you? Because I was just going to go to all the participants, but I'm not sure if everybody lost the earlier messages. I can only see a message from Sudha Gurung onwards. Did everyone lose the earlier chat, or is it just me? Can I request, I see Sophie. Sophie, do you see the earlier chat?
Yes, I don't know if there's any missing, but I mean, it seems to be all there.
Could you read out for us a few of the messages, maybe 3 or 4 on the chat? I've lost everything before Sudha Gurung saying we can hear you.
Okay. There wasn't much. It was mostly, yes, we need to get past the white savior mentality, tangible, profitable, and quantifiable. Dignified menstruation means for all menstruators. This is why it's so critical that we use the words like menstruators, non-menstruator. Totally agree. As current reproductive healthcare worker, the medical community is not properly trained at all about menstruation or taught the essence and significance of menses. We also see the discrimination show up in the medical field in medicine and birth control and abortion rights. That's about it.
Thank you so much, because I lost everything for some reason. But thanks, and I think that was Millie making the connection between patriarchy, well, patriarchy, of course, is the overall frame, but reminding us about choices and the fact that we are prisoner to capitalism and a monetized economy, which Kamla really put center stage for us. And I think Jaydeep reminded us about as well. So going forward, as we look at menstrual dignity, let's not forget that our choices are being made for us in the background as we speak, as we breathe, and as we sleep. So I think it's very important to be cognizant there. I'm going to now ask you wonderful panelists to think about the one takeaway lesson from the COVID pandemic for menstrual dignity going forward. As I said, it's not so much about this pandemic. We've lived through earlier, more devastating pandemics. Let's never forget the silent killer influenza. And we will live through this one. But what would be your one takeaway, that lesson that we need to bring from the pandemic to really bring dignity center stage and anchor it there in the menstrual movement? And I'm going to ask, maybe if I could ask Inga to kick it off, may I?
Sure. Well, the one thing I want to take away is I think that the pandemic and any pandemic has put much more emphasis on us recognizing disparities in so many different ways and how people are affected in different ways. And where I want to go from there is really to reclaim what human rights are actually about and really put all individuals center stage, because in the end, I mean, we are talking about humans, and human rights are about, for me, they are about acknowledging all our different experiences. They are inclusive, they are about embracing differences, and they are about enabling everyone to decide with autonomy and to live with autonomy. So I think I see so much in the space of what human rights are actually about, where human rights haven't become tokenistic and sanitized. And this movement of human rights from below, where we really center the voices of all menstruators, I think that is what we need to return to, and that is what we need to reclaim.
Thanks so much, Inga. That was such a powerful reminder. And for us to take away from what you just said, we need to claim our rights because those rights are there. Let's claim them, because they are a freedom that every human being is entitled to. Thank you for that. Roshni, what is the one lesson that you would like us to remember go after the pandemic that we must really put in place systematically for dignified menstruation?
Yeah. Main thing is in the practicality issue, because we have adequate knowledge on the curriculum, training package, and other aspects too. But main thing is the practical issue, and that practical must be from the childhood, while they are in the concept development phase. For this, school is the most important place, and our school nurses or the health teacher, they must convey the practical issues with rational rather than do's and don'ts, so that it will be the concept formations of the life period, one thing. And next one is, as I already mentioned, that it should be the role model by self, and then the role model of the key personnel of the societies, because it will be example for others. And included in the book or life courses, and even the health policy also included. But main thing is that start from self with practical issues, and that must be conveyed to all over for the as well as to the non-menstrual.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We can change hearts and minds, but if we don't change with us the workplace, schools, the public spaces, and systems, really, this is a package that needs to go together to bring dignity center stage and keep it there. Ram Naresh Yadav, over to you.
The main takeaway from this, during the pandemic situation is to mobilize school-going children at the community level to how to, safe, during the pandemic, to ensure the dignified menstruation and to use the utilities and their proper management and how to, the wash. The one thing is that, and the another thing is at the community level, while there was, during the lockdown time, the pandemic situation, the female community health volunteer also, it was very, it is very good to mobilize the FCHB at the community level through the health mother group. So, how to save side from the, during the COVID, to how the lactating woman and the pregnant woman will be, safe, how they will use the sanitary utilities and then to protect from the COVID-19, the viruses. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Sophie, over to you.
Okay, a couple of points. I think as journalists, we in the media, we need to tell stories that are inclusive and diverse. We need to get past the cliche stories and the white savior stories. I think we need to tell more character-driven stories, but ones that do not traumatize or victimize. And we need to ask the people that we're writing about or covering how they want their story to be told.
Oh, that was so well said, and fabulous segue to Sneha. Sneha, help us you work with the somatic, and really this is also going to be a lot about hearts and minds. So over to you, Sneha.
Yeah, I have 3 points. One learning can be to never forget what we saw. Never forget which countries couldn't manage it, which countries could, who acted how. And in India, migrants walked back home. Never forget what we saw. And second lesson would be to always understand that feminism is a practice. that anything can just put down, like, make everything, all the progress that we have made, regress, go back a few hundred years. So to always be aware. And the third one is adaptability, that we are not in nature, but we are nature. And these are the situations which call us to step up and to be really present and to adapt. So these would be the three takeaways that I would say.
Thank you so much. Real words of wisdom. And really, let's never forget that dignified menstruation is an extremely important end in itself, but more powerfully and more importantly, an entry point to really embracing gender equality and making it a reality, so that all human beings walk tall, no matter what their differences, where they come from. Really, it's about the true essence of feminism, which is embracing plurality with human respect and dignity. And I really want to shout out to the Global Coalition, Global South Coalition on Dignified Menstruation for just, through all these difficulties, without, as Inga reminded us, and we started on day one, without a lot of funding, without a lot of, a project frameworks, etc., but with love and commitment to make this happen through these really tough times, to engage us across ridiculous time zones, but to make sure that we're all here having this conversation. If you have a chat with Radha Podel, no matter what the chat is about, it could be about an Excel sheet, she always puts a few hearts on the chat. And, for me, that is the essence of this movement and this conversation. Love, embracing difference, learning from each other, and moving forward to make absolutely sure that we will not need to have this conversation in a workshop or a conference tomorrow, because we'll all be having it all the time with everyone close to us at home, in our neighborhoods and workplace. Thank you very much to my absolutely wonderful panelists and amazing all of you out there who joined from different geographies, participants on the chat. Love and warmth to you all. Keep safe and brave and keep dignity at the center. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much for that last panel, Archana, for heading that, and thank you to all participants.
Safe and free from all oppression. No more rape or incest or abuse. Women are not a possession. You never own me, don't even know me. I'm not invisible, I'm simply wonderful. I feel my heart for the first time racing. I feel alive, I feel so amazing. Dance for my love, dance for my dream. I got my dreams, I've had enough. Dance something sweet, dance break the rules. Dance some pain, dance turn it upside down. It's time to break the chain. Oh yeah, break the chain. Dance, rise, dance. In the middle of this madness, we will stand. I know there is a better world. Take your sisters and your brothers by the hand. Reach out to every woman and girl. This is my body's holy. No more excuses, no.
Thank you so much for sharing the lovely video again, and thank you to all participants and keynote speakers and panelists. This has been a wonderful second day and dialogue on dignified menstruation, and we will see you all tomorrow at 8:15 a.m. as well for our last session. Thank you so much.